Welcome to the Great Loop Radio podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today we are going to talk about what is a pretty hot topic these days, and that is converting a diesel-powered boat to electric power. So we'll jump into that topic in just a moment. Before we do, I want to take a moment, as always, to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Great Loop Yacht Sales, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Bryan Verhulp. Bryan started a very interesting thread over a year ago in our forum because he is, and has now completed, I believe, converting a trawler from diesel-powered to electric. So Bryan, thanks so much for joining us to talk about this super interesting project.
My pleasure.
And I know almost immediately when you started your thread, there was lots of interest in it, and you've gone ahead and kept people updated as you've gone through the project. But let's kind of start from the beginning. Tell us about yourself, if you would, and your boating experience.
Yeah, so I've just finished my second career. So I just retired from actively running a contracting company, which happens to be electrical, which is kind of handy. So I got my fingers in that a little bit, and I was military for 20 years prior to that. So 20 years, 21 years. So I'm semi-retired at this point. So about 2 years ago, I had a change in marital status, so I needed a project. So the project turned out to be a trawler. So previously I had a Sea Ray, 260 Sea Ray, ran up and down the Rideau Canal for a number of years, a bit of experience with that. And jumping into a trawler was completely new for me. Never had a boat with twin screws, let alone diesels or something of this size and weight. So that was new for me. And I never drove this boat with diesel engines in it. I bought it and went out for the sea trial. And after that, it never saw water again with the diesels in it, and I took them out, and then it goes from there.
So first of all, you bought the boat knowing you were going to do this conversion, I assume. Was there something you were looking for specifically in a trawler to make it easier or better for the conversion you were planning? Or was it, what is any trawler going to be possible for what you had planned?
No, there was a couple of criteria. First is it had to have twin screws. That was important just for maneuvering and so on. I wanted something with thrusters, which it didn't have, but I added those afterwards, a bow and stern thruster. I wasn't completely set on converting it when I bought the boat. The initial intention was to run it on diesels for a year or so, maybe convert it, then maybe do the loop. And then I got kind of hooked on the Great Loop idea. And one January, I guess it was almost 2 years ago now, I decided that's it. It's all coming out and I'm going to do this. So I've started ripping them out before I even had an idea of what I was going to use for propulsion. I figured that out as I went. There's nobody out there that had done this that I could see or use as a reference point. Especially with a trawler. A lot of people have done sailboats over the years, and that's relatively easy. There's another boat on the loop right now. It's an electric sailboat. They run a generator most of the time, but there is, it's starting to catch on a little bit more. But to do it in a trawler had never been done, and I couldn't find anyone that had done it to copy. So I had to figure it out as I went.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to sit in on a panel discussion at a marine conference about electric propulsion in the maritime environment. And a lot of the people that they had hired at the different boat builders came from the car environment. But, the basic premise was that boats are many years behind the automotive industry in being able to do this kind of technology. So you've obviously accomplished it. You're using the boat now. Tell us let's go through the specs of the trawler that you selected. How big is it? What kind of diesel engines did it have? That sort of thing.
Okay, yeah, it's a 35-foot Oceana 35. Then I built a sort of a homemade swim platform in the back, so a little bit bigger than that. It's got a 12-foot beam, 4.5-foot draft. The draft is a little bit deeper than I would like, but it does work. It's a 1985. So it's one of the typical boats, like the Monks and all the others, typical Taiwanese type trawlers. And this one, the nice thing about it, the really great thing about it is the amount of space inside, because I like to have chances for my kids to visit, my grandkids. I got 6 grandkids,
Oh
and
boy.
they like to come on the boat. And so I took the forward berth out of it, it was a half berth, I guess, on a galley, gutted that down to the fiberglass and built a full sort of a stateroom up there with its own head and so on. So it's got more space that way. So this boat was kind of ideal because of that. And I could make, that out of it. The rest of the boat I haven't really touched too much, except of course for all the solar conversion and stuff like that.
Yeah. But so clearly you've got a lot of skills beyond the electrical engineering part, because you're kind of redesigning the interior with the berths. So uh, for somebody who has no idea where I would start on a project like that, just super impressed from the get-go. But I know from reading your post, you also obviously could completely remove the diesel engines and thereby have some more space in the engine room. So what were the engines you removed? How much horsepower did they have? And tell us, kind of what goes in their place when you're doing this kind of refit on a boat.
Yeah, so it had twin Perkins in it, 90 horsepower each. This style of boat normally had 60 horsepower Perkins. Why it had 90s, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
With the transmissions, the standard velvet drive type transmissions, a couple of very large fuel tanks. It had quite a range, this boat. It's done the loop twice before on diesel power, this particular boat under different names. I can't remember them all right now, but this boat has changed names, I think, about 8 times now, whereas now, of course, it's Ring You Later. But yeah, so that all came out, and all the existing electrical, I gutted the electrical to nothing. All the wiring for the lights, the nav systems, the galley, all the lighting, everything has been replaced. New fuse panels, breaker panels in there as well. So the hardest thing of the whole job, the toughest thing, was getting the diesel engines out without cutting the floor out of the salon, and without cutting a big hole in the side of the boat in order to get them out. So in order to get them out, above the diesel engines, there was about 2 inches of space. And so I couldn't lift them because that was up underneath the edge of the floor where the settee is. So I took them and rolled them on their side with an engine hoist I had in here, rolled them on the side into the bilge, flipped them upright, and then lifted them up. They're 1,000 pounds each, minus the transmissions. I had those out separately, and then hoisted them up onto the main salon floor and dropped them down. Then I built a gangplank out the side of the side hatch, the side doors all these trawlers have. And the gangplank, the boat was on the hard, of course. I lifted them up onto the gangplank, shimmied them out there, and then somebody with a backhoe then picked them up and dropped them on the ground. And once they were on the ground, then people were running up to try to buy them, because Perkins engines, of course, are so well known.
Mm-hmm.
That was the hardest thing, was to get those out of here. Then the fuel tanks, those were actually easy to get out after I got them pumped. And then once those were gone and out of there, then I've got an empty engine room. There's nothing in there anymore. So I ground it right down to the fiberglass, repainted it, and the sun's coming on this side. Repainted it again, and then started the work of getting it all in. And the new electric motors I got from a company in Wisconsin called Electric Yacht. And they've been building quite a few of these motors over the years for sailboats, mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did offer a 30 kilowatt version, which is what I put in here. So I got 2 30 kilowatt electric motors, which then attach directly to the shaft, no transmission. So the reversing of the motor is simply done by the 3-phase motor, because it takes the 48 volts. It's all 48 volts DC. It takes the 48 volts DC, converts it to 48 volts AC, 3-phase, and that's what controls the motors. And it's directly onto the shafts, and that's how you get your forward reverse, and you go from there. And once those were put in, then it was the matter of the batteries. There's a company in Toronto that builds, called Microgreen, and they build batteries to whatever specification you want. So these are cabinet batteries. I've got 6 of them down there. They're about that high, and they weigh just over 300 pounds each. So if you ever see my boat, you'll see I've got a big crane on the back of the swim platform, and that's how I lifted them up into the boat, cranked them around, and then shimmied them down into the engine compartment, which now I call the vault. So once I got those 6 batteries in there, then it's a matter of getting them positioned, strapped down, attached, and then the wiring. The cost of tinned copper to wire up batteries that big was astronomical. I could not believe the price of, proper marine grade copper. And I've got fuses down there for everything. Jim Healy would be proud. So everything is fused up and done pretty well to ABYC standard for the most part. I didn't take really any shortcuts at all that I can recall, and that worked out quite well. So once the batteries are all in there, then it's wiring it up and then getting it in, and then the controls. I'm going to try to keep this sun a little bit less.
Yeah.
And that worked out pretty good. It's just a matter of time. So from the time I started ripping out the diesels until I got to the point where I could drop it in the water was about 8 or 9 months. So then I just kept working on it over that time and over the following winter. So from start to finish, it was about 18 months. And then this spring is when I started doing the solar panel part of it, which we'll get to later.
Yeah. So lots of information there. One of the questions I have, you mentioned that the new electric engines are 30 kilowatts, I believe.
Yes.
The old diesel engines were, the spec ones were 60 horsepower
Yes.
for the boat. How do the kilowatts to horsepower, does it translate? Does the boat now have the same amount of power it once had, less power, or
Just
can you even tell?
Yeah, it has slightly less. There is no direct conversion for that.
Okay.
The engineers try to, and as a retired engineer, I do as well. It's roughly 50 horsepower for each one.
Gotcha.
So it gives me pretty well what it had. I can bring the boat up to hull speed up to 7 knots. But as I'll explain later, at that point, then my batteries run down very quickly. So yeah, about 50 horsepower each.
Gotcha. And you mentioned 6 300-pound batteries, I believe. So 1,800 pounds of batteries. The engines were about 1,000 pounds each, I think you said. But I do remember reading in your forum post that you did have to add some ballast because once all that heavy equipment, the fuel tanks, I guess, certainly add to that. How did all that work out? A lot of maritime design is considering all of the weight factors. So once you've removed the engines, the fuel tanks, all of those things, how much ballast did you have to add and how much did it help?
Yeah, well, the ballast, it turned out, because after I put the solar panels on the boat now with all the solar panels and the infrastructure, because I put a hard top on the boat as well, so there's no more canvas up there. So I built that out of PVC foam board, framed it all up with stainless steel. The boat now has approximately the same weight as before because of all the solar panels I've added. I've got 16 solar panels up there. That adds quite a bit of weight. But the problem is the boat now became light on the bow. The bow came up because most of the solar panels are aft of center. So it came up a little too far on the front end, so it was back right in the water. So I put a large water tank underneath the forward V-berth that I've just filled with water, and also the old black water tank, which of course I don't need because we'll get into the composting. That's filled with just water as well. So that now has brought the bow of the boat down to where it pretty well should be. So I'm pound for pound about the same. The downside to it now with the solar panels is I am slightly top heavy. So I have to be a little careful of that because that's a lot of weight way up high, but I don't intend to be spending that much time in the ocean, a little bit in the Gulf and maybe the Bahamas if I can make it. And other than that, yeah, that's about the same weight wise.
Yeah, excellent. Super interesting. So you mentioned the solar panels. So that is how you're generating your electricity. Is it strictly solar or are there other ways that you can generate electric to charge up your batteries? Is there a plug-in, so to speak, like an electric car would have if that was available at a dock?
Yeah, so I don't go to marinas very often. I just counted them up this morning. I've been to 13 marinas in the 4 months on the loop so far. Some of them a little bit longer, like I was in Hammond. I took a little longer because I had to do some work on the boat, so I stayed in a marina for a little bit longer. But for the most part, I charge only with the solar panels. So the solar panels, when you add it all up, it's about 6,000 watts. So that's a medium-sized generator. However, because the solar panels are flat, you don't get the full 6,000. So I get between 3,000 and 4,000 watts of power from the solar when it's sunny out. So now it's like almost 5 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock. I'm still getting about 1,500 watts of power from the little bit of sun that's out there. So that's the primary thing is solar. I've also installed 2 wind turbines up on the boat. The problem with the wind turbines is that they're essentially useless. They give you very little power. At a good rate of, they need a minimum 10 knots of wind sustained, better at 20. Well, once you pass 20 knots of wind, I'm not going out my boat most of the time.
Right.
So the wind turbines have proven to be rather inefficient. So actually one of them has failed. I boxed it up and I mailed it in yesterday to get the factory to look at it. So I get, maybe 50 watts out of them on a good windy day. At one point, there was a huge wind gust came through and I ran down below to see, and I was getting 250 watts. So that was something, but that's never sustained. So that's the wind turbine side of it. The charging, if I do go to marina, or sometimes you can get, especially in Canada, I found there's a few more places, some of the town docks had power you could plug into for free all day as long as you didn't stay overnight. So I'd go up there and charge during the day, pop out for an anchor overnight, then come back again. There's a couple places like that up in the North Channel. It was great. Yeah. Once I get down here, though, if I go to marina like I did last night, I was in Demopolis, or it's called another name for the marina. I can't remember now. But there, when I plug in there, I've got two chargers. So I've got the main Victron charger, which is a 48 volt, 5,000 watt charger inverter. So when I plug that into a 30 amp shore power, I get approximately about, I would say about 50 amps out of it, give or take, from that one. Then I have another charger that came with the electric motors. I plug those in. That's another 50 amps of power I'm getting at 48 volts. And then if it's a sunny day, so when I pulled into Demopolis yesterday, I was looking at the power coming in. I was getting 7 kilowatts of charge at one time. That's the sun with both of the chargers running. And that charges the batteries up in about 12 and a half to 13 hours. If the marinas knew, I hope they're not watching this, knew how much power I drew when I plugged in, they would charge me for it. The extension cords coming in, even the 50 amp cord coming off and to the splitter, they get warm. That's how much power I'm drawing.
Okay.
And it's like an electric car. When you're drawing and you're charging, it's what we call in the electrical world, we call it a continuous load. It's full on. It doesn't cycle like a stove or an air conditioner or something like that. So those are all my methods of giving power. And when I get absolutely stuck, which I did on Lake Michigan twice, and also coming up the Ohio River, that was nasty, right around when Hurricane Helen came through. And there was so much water and current. I turned off the Mississippi at Cairo to the Ohio, and my boat came to a dead stop in the current. It took me 3 days to get from there to Paducah.
Wow.
That's a 1 day short cruise.
Yeah.
When I got into Paducah, there was a whole whack of loopers waiting on the dock, cheering me on. I came in at 1 knot.
Wow.
That's how dead my batteries were. So what I use then is I do have a little portable propane generator, a little 3,000 watt that I use if I absolutely have to, but I almost never use it unless I'm really, really stuck. When my batteries are that low, then all I do is drop the anchor and I sit. A couple of days, ready to go, or even a day. Going down the Mississippi, there was nothing but sun pretty well every day. I was doing 40 nautical miles a day, and that was really nice because of the current and just going along with the sun. It was great.
So without shore power, you mentioned you just drop the hook and let the sun charge, basically. How long does that take for you to get a full charge on your batteries if you're relying just on the solar?
Yes, if they run right down, it'll be 2 full days of good sun up north, not here. The days now are too short. We're down into, it gets dark at 6 o'clock. So at this climate in this area now, it would take probably 3 days. But I don't need a full charge. All I need is just a little bit so I can get going. And if it's a sunny day, a really nice sunny day out, especially like yesterday, I can go along at 3 knots without using any battery.
Wow.
That's assuming no wind, no current, and no fly lands on my boat. It takes very little to stop that. So yeah, I can maintain 3 knots indefinitely on a good sunny day without using any battery.
This is all so interesting to me because I don't know very much about it, and I'm learning a lot through this conversation. But so how far can you cruise? I mean, I guess indefinitely if the sun is shining and you're good with 3 knots. If the sun's not shining, What's a typical day for you, perhaps, is maybe a better question. What's the typical distance? You said you had a few 40-mile days, but what's kind of the average you do in a day, and what's your typical cruising speed?
Yeah, the average would be 25 to 30 nautical miles.
Mm-hmm.
My cruising speed, that I typically try to run around 3.5,
Mm-hmm.
not counting the current into that 3.5, 4. So just some very quick round numbers,
Yeah.
because some of the people will love this. So when you have electric propulsion, what happens is you've got a certain amount of power you're drawing, but every knot you go up, it doubles the amount of power that you draw.
Okay.
So at 3 knots, it's about 3 kilowatts of power. So I can get that from solar easily, and that will then get me about 30 hours of cruising at
Okay.
3 knots,
Mm-hmm.
no sun. Once you go to 4 knots, it doubles. So now you're doing 6 kilowatts of power you're drawing, and you've dropped down your cruising time to 15 hours. 5 knots, it doubles again to 12 kilowatts, and you are going to get around 7 hours of cruising. Now,
Okay.
these are round numbers based on
Right.
a lot of different things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's where it gets fun. Once you get to 6 knots, you're into 25 kilowatts of power that you're pulling, and you get 3.5 hours of cruising. At 7 knots, it's pulling 50 kilowatts of power. Now, you think 50 kilowatts, that's a lot of juice.
Mm-hmm.
It's pulling, and you get 1.5 hours of cruising.
Hmm.
So to put that
Interesting.
into context, at three
Mm-hmm.
knots, you can go about 30 hours. So that's 90 nautical miles.
Yeah.
At 7 knots, half, that's just over 10 nautical miles. Now you're going to get there a lot faster, but you're only going to be able to go for 10 nautical miles. So
Right.
that's a massive difference. The curve is just insane. And anybody that does math, and there's a lot of, I see in the forum, a lot of people like numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
an exponential amount of power increase every knot that you go up. So hence the magic number is around 3.5 knots, 3.5 knots is what I normally go. Today from Demopolis down to where I'm anchored right now, I was doing 3.5 knots and using no battery
Mm-hmm.
with enough sun. So yeah, that's what the numbers work out to.
Yeah. So 3.5 knots is not too speedy.
No.
How is your patience required to be cruising at that speed?
Somebody asked me that the other day.
Mm-hmm.
So the beauty about running at that speed is you don't always have to be at the helm. Not much
Mm-hmm.
happens at 3.5 knots.
Right.
So you can run down, go get something, make a coffee. I usually have a coffee machine beside me because I drink a lot of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Or for 2 or 3 minutes, you don't have to be at the helm at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, even to watch, because not much happens unless there's a big stick that comes up or something like that. But yeah, patience is not an issue for me. And as you know, and I am a solo looper as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, I like it.
Yeah.
It's,
Excellent.
it's, and there's not a rock or a tree or a house or an embankment or a boat or anything I miss. I see
You
everything.
get to see everything go by.
I see everything. I got a
That's
pair of
right.
binoculars beside me. So yeah, and then you can stand up and stretch and yeah, it works out pretty well.
Yeah, excellent. Well, let's take a break and play a message from a sponsor. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about, if you're willing to share some of the estimates of costs of the conversion. So we will
Sure.
be back in just a moment.
All right.
Prop Talk is an Annapolis-based company founded in the summer of 2005 by active Chesapeake Bay boaters. The company produces Prop Talk Magazine, a monthly newsprint magazine focused on Chesapeake Bay power boating and the lifestyle surrounding boating on the bay. Every issue of Prop Talk is distributed at more than 850 carefully chosen and closely monitored locations throughout the Mid-Atlantic. Prop Talk's coverage goes deep rather than wide, and the magazine celebrates the people, places, boats, personalities, and events that make the Chesapeake one of the world's premier boating grounds. Thanks for reading and supporting the Chesapeake Bay's boating magazine.
Winter Harbor Marina is located on the Oneida River 1.5 miles west of Oneida Lake in Brewerton, New York, just minutes from Syracuse International Airport. Winter Harbor offers the lowest diesel fuel and gas prices from New York City to Canada. If you find a lower posted documented price, they will match it. Their amenities include complimentary courtesy vehicle, 24-hour pay-at-the-pump fueling, dockside water and cable TV, pristine bathrooms and showers, and emergency haul-out service. For more information, call 315-676-9276 or visit www.winterharborllc.com. Winter Harbor is a proud commander sponsor of AGLCA.
We're back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. My guest today is Bryan Verhulp. He has converted his trawler from diesel to solar power, essentially generating electric aboard so that he can have his propulsion system working. Fascinating story. I'm interested in the cost. You're obviously saving a lot of money on fuel. And for a time when we were out on our loop, fuel was approaching $7 a gallon on the waterway for diesel. So the idea of not spending that is pretty attractive. You're, of course, making some trade-offs there. You know, our average cruising speed was probably about 10 knots. Yours is about 3.5. To each their own. You know, there's no right or wrong answer to what the speed should be. And the 3.5 knots is what is kind of your sweet spot. Every boat's got one. But so tell us, at this point in time, is the cost of a conversion like this able to be made up on the savings for fuel?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Next question.
Easy answer
no,
there.
Yeah, I get a good chuckle at the people when they got to go up to the gas dock, because I don't need pump outs either. I've got a compost toilet. We'll get at that later. But anyway, so people are always having to go in. They've got to look at where the fuel is and all this stuff. And I don't worry about that. Of course, when I run out, I've got to stop and charge. Of course,
Right.
There's a big difference. So you pay for your fuel up front. And rough numbers, I would say it's going to be at least 10 years of active cruising for me to sort of get the money back. Now, there's all kinds of other benefits that come with it. It's not just the monetary cost,
right?
But it takes a long time. And if you had to pay labor to do this work, because I did this alone with no help, if you had to pay labor, I would roughly guess you're into $50,000 to $75,000 in labor to do this conversion, to add it on top. So none of that's included in my numbers. So.
Gotcha.
I apologize to my American friends, but I'm going to do this in Canadian dollars.
That's fine. Fair enough.
Because that's how it was kind of done. So about a 1.3 conversion. So the batteries are $10,000 each. They are 48-volt custom-made batteries with battery management systems that I can change and tweak and program. I had to change one of them so far, one failed. So that has been pretty cool. So I know the owner of the company that made them, I know the engineer, and I know the technician that made the batteries. So anything that happens or goes on, I have direct contact with them. So that's been great. So they're about $10,000 each. You can get a lot of batteries a lot cheaper, but then they're throwaways. The motors are about $20,000 a piece. They're the ones from Electric Yacht. They're not cheap. There are cheaper ones out there, but these ones have given me zero grief. Absolutely. They are just humming along beautifully. The wire that I had to buy, all the tin copper, especially when it's all tin copper, is upwards of $10,000. It added up fairly quickly. I can't count how many rolls of the 250 amp wire I had to buy. The solar panels were about $10,000. I bought name brand solar panels, not no names. So that made a big difference. And the wind turbines are around $2,000 each. So when I added up the total cost of everything that I put into the boat, including the internal renovations, the parts and pieces, and all the other stuff that I put into this, it comes up, I got a detailed spreadsheet, it comes up to $199,000. There's a lot of stuff in there that you have to do to a boat anyway that has nothing to do with the electric propulsion. Okay. I would say at least 50 of that. But if you took $150,000 Canadian, added on labor onto that to do this, and then not being able to fix it yourself if something goes wrong, it gets rather expensive. So $150,000 is a lot of fuel. So the average person spends what, 10, 20 grand on fuel for the loop? 20 grand?
For us, it was more than that. On a trawler, your number is probably good for a trawler. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about that's 6 or 7 years minimum to get that back, plus the labor time and stuff into it. So yeah, the costs add up relatively quick, but it was my project, and this is my home. I don't have a dirt home. So this is my home for now until I decide to do something else. Who knows? And but yeah, it's not cheap.
No, but it's clearly a passion project for you. And the fact that there really wasn't another trawler doing this for you to model off of is really just fascinating that you were able to get this done. obviously you finished it. It is working. Tell us where you started your loop, and you mentioned you're just, I guess, in Demopolis or a little south of Demopolis at this point. But where did you start?
I started in the Thousand Islands. My home marina was Clark's Marina. Shout out to Clark's Marina. They are also sponsoring me just a little bit for the trip, which is nice. But
Hmm.
that's my home marina, Thousand Islands, Gananoque. From there, I took the Montreal or the St. Lawrence River to Montreal, just because I'd never done that part of the river system.
Hmm.
And then from Montreal to Ottawa, that's where I ran into my first loopers. Going upriver 4 days, upriver with no sun whatsoever. That was fun.
Yikes.
And then from Ottawa down the Rideau Canal. The Rideau Canal I've done, I can't count how many times in the past. And then from there, go across the Trenton up, and from there, it's the same loop as everybody else.
Yeah.
So, up in the Northern Passage and down after the Trent Severn and so on. And for the spacing of the group of loopers that are there, I'm sort of on the leading third if you kind of look at where everybody is,
Hmm.
especially coming off of the rendezvous. I wish I could have made the rendezvous, but it was too far out of the way for me. I can't afford
Yeah.
that many miles.
Hmm.
But yeah, so that's where, and I just passed Demopolis. So that's 4 months in. I'll head down to Mobile, and there I am hoping to do some more work on the boat. I'm always looking to add something on. As an engineer, your mind is always thinking about things to fix.
Hmm.
And then to Florida, and I found a free slip for the winter. Uh,
Nice.
yes, as long as I need to leave it for to fly home for Christmas and so on. So that's pretty
Right.
cool. And yeah, then I'm going to try to go to the Bahamas. And I've done the numbers. I've been running the numbers, engineer again, and I think I can make it.
Hmm.
I'll need another generator to get across, and I think I can get across.
So, do you think when you get back to the Thousand Islands, will it have taken you about the kind of traditional year-long loop, or do you think it'll take you longer than that?
No, it'll be almost exactly on time. I left on the 15th of June, and I'll be back the 1st of June, give or take.
Hmm.
I'm not sure the exact date yet.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to take a couple of weeks and decide what's next, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So, any surprises from what you expected the performance to be versus the actual performance after the conversion?
The performance of the motors was almost exactly right on. The manufacturer of the motors kind of told me what it was going to be, and it was very, very, very close.
Hmm.
The battery performance has been bang on, except the one minor failure, but I could change that myself and make it work again. So the performance of the batteries has been spot on. No surprises there. The big surprise I got was number one was the wind turbines. That was disappointment, not getting
Hmm.
as much power as I needed to. And the solar panels, I knew that when the solar panels were flat, that I wasn't going to quite get what you normally get for solar panels, which are angled towards the sun in different seasons and blah, blah, blah. So I had counted on about a 10 to 15% loss of power to what the peak should have been. And it's more like 30 to 35%.
Okay.
So I was hoping to be able to maintain 5 knots for cruising. That's just not going to happen. It never will.
Hmm.
So that's fine. I'm good with that. And like I say to people as they come by me, I have a special horn that I've mounted up on the boat. It's the old fashioned Oogle horn. So when people pass me, I hit it and I take the
Fun.
picture and so on. So every looper passes me. Every one of them passes me.
Hmm.
And I almost always catch up. So it's just more days of traveling. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
the
love it.
disappointing part, the performance side, and the thing that has been a little bit tough to try to work around has been the solar panels not being what they should have been.
Hmm.
If I could have gotten a full 6 kilowatts out of them, I'd be skimming along the water.
Yeah. So you've also mentioned that you were able to remove the black water tank or use it for a different purpose to help weight on the bow because you installed composting toilets. So how was that project? Is that another really challenging long-term project, or is that an easy change for a trawler?
That's easy.
Hmm.
You rip the old one out, pop it down. You need to put some ventilation into it, of course, for obvious reasons.
Hmm.
But that's a no-brainer. Composting toilets work like a charm. Every marina I go into, every time I run into loopers, say, oh, the showers here are great, and the washrooms are great, and the laundry is great. I don't need any of it because I
Hmm.
also installed a wash machine.
Oh.
So no dryer though, because dryers
Hmm.
draw too much power.
Right.
So it's a matter of the compost toilet has been a no-brainer. It's extremely easy to use,
Hmm.
zero odor from it. It works like a charm. I think every boat should have one.
And once the waste has been composted down, there is something you have to remove occasionally, if I'm remembering correctly how composting toilets work. There's no discharge into the water from it. It's something that you have to occasionally empty shoreside. Is that correct, or has that changed since I
Yeah,
last
so
looked at composting toilets?
yeah, so this one is sort of a passive system, so it doesn't have the heater to incinerate and so on. So without getting into the graphics of it,
Mm-hmm.
the solids essentially just become dirt over time.
Okay.
Really, that's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
People that have composting toilets in cottages and homes and so on, they use them in their gardens, not vegetable gardens, but flower gardens and different
Mm-hmm.
things. Um, but it's just dirt, garbage. Put it in a hole, whatever you want to do with it. It doesn't really matter anymore at
Mm-hmm.
that point, because you only have sewage when you mix the two products, the liquid and
Gotcha.
the solid. When
Yeah.
you mix the two, you get solid sewage. If you keep them separate, it's not sewage anymore. So it's
So
really it's very easy.
yeah. So you
Yeah,
have no
that would
need
that
for fuel stops, no need for pump outs. What about water? Do you have to take on water at marinas, or do you have a water maker aboard? How are you handling that?
Yeah, that is the next project. I've done a
Okay.
significant amount of research and I've settled on a given water maker that I'm going to get, and I'll probably install it over Christmas. Maybe when I'm in Mobile, I'm not sure yet how that's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I want to get a water maker is like I've got a large set of holding tanks, and being the only person on the boat, 175 gallons of fresh water does me a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I can do almost a month depending on how much laundry that I do. The laundry uses up
Yeah.
quite a bit of water, even though it's a
Mm-hmm.
small machine. So that's fine that way. But the reason I need the water maker is the solar panels. The solar panels need to be cleaned. So once a week, I hose them down, and every 2 weeks or so, I go up there with a scrub brush and scrub them. And any water you get from a marina or the water you're in, unless it's right up in the top of the North Channel where it's almost crystal clear,
Yeah.
has particles in it, some kind of salt or chlorine or something, and that creates spots on the solar panels. Little
Interesting.
spots. So, and that reduces the amount of power that you get from it. Any kind of
Mm-hmm.
shadowing will reduce the amount you get from the solar. So, the only reason I'm putting the water maker on is for the solar panels, because I can go a month without water.
Yeah.
And
Fascinating.
and if you get up, like I said, you get up in the North Channel, you can just pump it straight out of the lake and use it. But down here, of course, it's very muddy, a
Right.
lot of mud and stuff in it. Actually, the water down here is cleaner than I thought. I was
Mm-hmm.
quite surprised, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the next thing is water. So at that point, I am then autonomous.
Yeah. Completely off the grid. Now, is that the goal? Or is that just kind of the logical progression of your project?
It's just the logical progression, and it's just fun.
Yeah.
So a lot of this stuff I do is just because I can. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I've got the time, I've got the skills, and I love just changing things. Like yesterday, I spent the day adjusting how the solar panels. So if you ever see a picture of my boat, there's 4 solar panels off the back of the sun deck that are on hinges.
Mm-hmm.
So they stick out past the boat, and I call them wings.
Okay.
So these wings sit sort of like that. And I've got actuators I just installed, so I can now adjust the angle of my wings.
Wow.
When I go into a lock, I drop them down so that I can go up against it, because they stick out about 3.5 feet from the side of the boat. So that's just a nice fun project to figure out how I can do that without having to do it manually to lift the solar panels, my wings,
Mm-hmm.
up and down, and I can angle them to the sun to get more charge out of them. That's just fun.
Fascinating discussion. I wish I had the kind of brain that did that kind of problem solving. I do not. My 2 sons are engineers, and they must have gotten that from their dad, because I do not have that brain. So it's pure fun for me to talk to you about this, Bryan, especially because you are so passionate about it. And to hear your story is really been enlightening and fascinating. It's been a really fun conversation. So thank you for sharing the details. We'd love to have you back as you progress, maybe hear about how it goes when you go to the Bahamas.
Yes, I would. I'll keep posting. Most of the stuff I do is all on YouTube. I put
Mm-hmm.
more on YouTube than I do on the forum, just an easier format. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff there. If people want to see it, can I tell them the name of the YouTube channel?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just my first name spelled with a Y. So it's at Bryan's, Bryans, Electric Trawler. So at Bryan's Electric Trawler.
Perfect. And we'll include a link to that in the description. For those of you listening to the audio of this, it'll be in the description of the podcast. And for those of you watching this on YouTube, we'll link right to Bryan's YouTube channel.
Okay. Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Again, thank you, Bryan. This has really been a fun episode for me. I've learned a lot. And again, your enthusiasm is just spectacular. We don't see that every day. So congratulations on the success of your project. And we can't wait to hear about what's next.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you to everyone who's watched or listened to this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio podcast. Until then, safe cruising.